Welcome everyone to tonight's cooking class. We are doing traditional Polish cuisine. So do we have anyone that has some traditional Polish in their background? No? Oh my gosh, what are we going to say then, Jared?
Say whatever you want.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We can say whatever we want.
We're not going to be corrected because we said something inaccurate. Again, I'd like to welcome you, and we hope that you enjoy tonight. We were looking through topics. We kind of came up with we need to do something, and I'm not real sure why we chose Polish, but we did. So we're here to kind of do some Polish things with you tonight. I'm Rhonda. I'm one of the dietitians here at the hospital, and Jared, you know him as one of our guys down in the kitchen area. Lindsay Sparks is also one of the other dietitians that works with us here, and we have a new dietitian now. So Lynetta Smith is our new dietitian on staff, where she's been here since the 1st of the month, right after Labor Day. So we're really glad to have her involved, and she's just watching this time, doing next month, watching this time, doing next month. So she'll be involved in the cooking class next month as well. So how was last month? I missed last month. So
it was really good without you.
thank you very much. And so I'll just see if I can miss another one. So did you try some of the recipes that Lindsay and Jarrett went over with you? No? Yes? Tried recipes?
No.
Yes? No?
Very good.
Some of them? Okay.
I think for average Missouri palate, probably a little bit much.
Okay. The average Missouri palate was a little bit much last month.
Not for me.
Not for you. But you're not an average Missourian.
Pre and probiotics, right?
Yeah, pre and probiotics.
There we go.
Hopefully you got some beneficial information during that session as well. So we're getting ready to look at topics for next year. So if you have something in particular that you would like for us to share with you, we would take suggestions, because right now I have zero. I have zero thoughts about what we're going to haven't thought about that yet. So we're going to start today. Are you going to show us some chopping and stuff like that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, our first recipe is going to be the stuffed cabbage rolls. Wonkies. I thought there wasn't any Polish information around here.
No, you asked if there were any Polish
Oh,
backgrounds.
okay. But you do know about some Polish foods, it sounds
Oh,
like.
yes.
Yes, okay. Well, we'll take any of those. Anytime you want to interject, that would be fine.
Oh, no.
So our first recipe is going to be that the stuffed cabbage rolls. So, Jared, you want to share with us a little bit about how you get those cabbage leaves?
Absolutely. If you look at the recipe, it describes you to core your cabbage, your head of cabbage, and then put it in a pot of boiling water. Now, some people prefer to do it that way. Some people prefer to core it and then peel the leaves off and then just dip the leaves individually into some boiling hot water. Basically, all you're doing is softening that leaf up so that whenever you go to roll it, it doesn't break and crack and do all the stuff that you don't want it to do, right? To core, I always prefer to get something like a nice stiff boning knife that will it will work very easily to slide in and start cutting around. It can be a bit tedious, and it can be difficult simply because it's a head of cabbage and it rolls everywhere. I wouldn't suggest trying to, because sometimes you can take the core and pound it on your table really hard. That'll help break that core loose. The problem with that is sometimes that'll end up causing some cracking in other areas of the leaves, and then you're kind of defeating the purpose of keeping those leaves nice and whole to do some rolling. So basically you're just going to start at a point. You're going to want to go at an angle because you need about 2 inches, right? On most of the time, the core is going to be about 2 inches. You want to go about a ½ an inch out from the edge of the core, and you're just going to work that knife down and around. That's why you got to get a nice thin blade so that when it cuts you, it's not that bad.
So when I tried this at home last night, I did very similar to what Jared is doing. And then I did go ahead and leave the core in and put it in that pot of boiling water until those leaves kind of softened up, and then I could peel them off. But you could go ahead and take the core out and then go ahead and immerse it in the boiling water as well. Right, Jared?
Absolutely.
Okay.
At our age, that's not gonna happen.
There it goes. Found the spot.
The core, yeah.
There we go. So, you're going to have a lot of leaves on the outside area that are going to be pretty floppy, kind of beat up, because it's a head of cabbage, so it gets tossed around. And exactly. Yep. For your scrap soup. That's exactly right. Okay, so you're going to want to try to work off some of those. This is not the best head of cabbage to use, just because, as you can see, it's already been slammed on the ground somewhere and cracked and broke, right? But I prepared. So, once you're done and you have boiled your leaf to where it's nice, we'll get rid of this sad head of cabbage, right? Once you get your leaves boiled, however you plan on doing them, I'm not a big fan of leaving the cabbage whole and dropping it into boiling water, simply because I haven't had very much luck with it. It may just be because I'm impatient, but I haven't had the greatest luck with it getting into all the areas and soaking in. It seems to make the outside edges kind of way too soft, and the ones further in a little bit hard to deal with. Now, if you have some cracking and breaking, that's okay. You just want to keep the leaf as whole as possible, right? Like the one that we have here. As you can see, it's got some areas that are broken up, but generally it's in good shape, okay? You're going to want to use the edges that are the most whole for your finishing touch, right? So, we've got our beef. We are ready to go. We're going to fold these areas in. We're going to get that pulled nice and tight. We are ready to go. And then it can go just like that in the pan. I believe the directions here said to do it in a skillet. I would suggest trying it in a pan and baking it in the oven. That really does, for me, again, for me personally, I feel like that works a lot better. You don't have to, you're not moving, the more you move this roll, the more it's going to come apart. And if you're putting it in a skillet and cooking it that way, that leaves for sticking to the bottom of the skillet. It leaves for a lot of areas for things to go wrong, okay? So in my line of cooking here at the hospital, I do recipe development. And so one of the main things that I try to do is not just find recipes that people will eat, right? I have to find recipes that have ingredients that we already have on hand, okay? We never want to have an item that only gets used for one thing. Makes sense? The other thing is we want to make sure that anyone can come in, read these directions, follow this recipe, and come out with the same exact product that the person before them did. Okay? So we want to make sure that that's consistency too. So in doing that, we always try to weed out all the stuff that could go wrong. Right? Overcooking and things like that, you'll never get rid of it. It'll happen no matter what. But we're going to try to take out as many of the probabilities of things going wrong as we can. And that's how we come up with the processes to do so. And that's why I'm telling you, if it was me, I would lay these out in a nice pan or a Pyrex dish, put a little bit of marinara sauce in the bottom, roll up your cabbage rolls, put them in there, cover them with sauce, cover them with maybe saran wrap and aluminum foil, pop them in the oven to bake. Okay? It takes about the same amount of time as it does in the skillet, but you have less probability of things going wrong.
I would agree, because I did it last night in the skillet. You have trouble getting those rolls to all fit in that round skillet, and I had a large skillet. So I did put the olive oil in the bottom so they didn't stick. So you could do it that way. So you could do the marinara sauce in the bottom, or you can put the olive oil in the bottom as well. So some of the ingredients that are inside those cabbage rolls, we got a brown rice, so that's going to be a whole grain rice for us to use, and we've got ground beef. And of course, we think it would be a good idea to use really lean ground beef, or ground turkey. You could substitute that for sure. And then of course it has the onion and garlic and mushroom and several of those spices, and then using reduced sodium soy sauce. There's nothing else at my house. That's the only kind of soy sauce there is. So that helps reduce the overall sodium content. The marinara sauce, I found myself using some kind of leftover marinara sauce. And then it also calls for using some no salt added petite diced tomatoes. And they do have them on the shelf. So if you want to try to reduce the overall sodium content, the marinara sauce was not a low sodium marinara sauce. So that's where we're contributing quite a bit of the sodium in this particular recipe. But you can buy some no salt added petite diced tomatoes. So combining those two things together as well. I did feel like as I did it in the skillet, this would probably work better in the oven, but I was in the skillet already. So I actually did put the topping on, stuck my skillet under my broiler so that it would brown. So using a couple of those cheeses with a little bit of the panko breadcrumbs, and then it was a nice golden top on it. I don't know how ours turned out here. If we had the nice. Okay. So you see, you probably do realize that there is a lot of cabbage used in the Polish eating. So that's one of their kind of traditional staple foods is to use cabbage. They kind of also use several of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. They're really conservative. They really had a lot of survival foods. So you could use your ground beef, or you could substitute the ground turkey, and then several of these spices that are included in there. I'm not a huge oregano fan, so mine was a little bit overpowering oregano. So you could adjust that maybe after you try it, or after you try it tonight, and see if you liked what the recipe did have it in. So it could be like a one dish meal. We've got a grain, we've got a meat, we've got the cabbage leaf that kind of keeps everything all pulled together, and of course we've got the tomatoes on it. So it could be a one dish meal, I felt like, after I tried it. So some of you have tried it now. Any comments? Thoughts? Good. Have you had cabbage rolls before?
Yes.
Yes? Is this good, better, about the same as the others?
Needs more cabbage on the side.
Needs more cabbage on the side. I had plenty left with mine last night too.
Did you?
Yeah. I had plenty of cabbage left. In fact, I think it could have made the 100 stews. What?
And she said, "Can I have another one?" And I'll tell you if I like it.
Oh, okay.
And the great thing about
I like it,
cabbage
okay.
is that cabbage is very resilient. I think that's why you'll see a lot of countries like this that have a little bit different weather than we do. It can get really cold even in the summertime, and the cabbages are so resilient. I mean, I've grown cabbage to where there's snow falling on the ground and it's doing just fine. So they're just really, really tough vegetables. So, question?
Question.
Did you mention the oven temperature to put them in the oven?
350. 350 is a good temp to go with. If your oven runs a little hot, because like we've said many times before, sometimes our ovens run way different than others, and so if you have a tendency for your oven to run a little hot, I'd probably drop it down to 325. It's a good safe temperature.
For how long?
For about 50 to 55 minutes. You're going to want to hit an internal temperature of at least 165. I know typically with ground beefs, the done temperature for ground beef is 155 degrees. But on any type of stuffed anything, you're always going to want to hit 165 with that. So
you are putting raw ground beef in it.
yes.
The rice, it calls for the rice to be cooked, but that is that raw ground beef. So I kind of think of it, how long do you cook a meatloaf? So you want to make sure that ground beef does cook. So again, it's going to be an all-around all-around food that could be just the entire meal. You probably have more than one, Jan, if you're using it for your entire meal. So is this one that you would try at home?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, good. Okay, I'm going to let Lucy go ahead then with their next one.
All right, can you guys hear me okay? All right. So our next recipe is the apple and leeks salad, which, how many of you have had leeks before? See a few hands, yeah. So it's, looks like this. Jared's going to show us how to process it here in a minute. It's in the onion family, so it's kind of a little bit mild and a little bit slightly sweet, I think, compared to like your yellow onion. So this salad is kind of like a coleslaw, is what I kind of interpreted it as. So we've got that kind of tangy and sweet flavor from the apples. When I made this recipe at home, I just had Greek yogurt on hand. So I ended up using Greek yogurt, plain Greek yogurt. So it might have been even a little bit more tangy. I'm not sure what you guys use. You use Greek yogurt as well. Okay, so if you're not a big fan of like a tangy flavor, you might try just using the plain yogurt versus that Greek yogurt, which is a little bit more tart. But this dish was really easy and simple to put together. Once you get through cutting the apples, I think took a little bit of time, and I'm curious to know how they processed them here. But at home, I just julienned them, which I think if you were here at our last class, Jared showed how to do that, to cut them into thin matchsticks. But basically just kind of small, bite-sized pieces that are going to kind of contrast well with the thinly sliced leek. I'm going to hand it over to Jared to show how to cut into that leek and
Yes.
what we're going to do with it. Yeah.
Leeks are a little bit difficult in the sense that they're very close to the ground and they get a lot of dirt. Okay. Any type of thing that we eat that's in the herb family, which if it grows from the outside or from the inside, so basically, if you look at this, it has these constant layers all the way through it. Those are the herb families, and they love collecting dirt as they grow. Okay. So basically, the best way to wash these is to fill up a pot or something with some cold water and soak it. And you're constantly going to be pushing it into the water, almost like how you would do a green onion. Does anybody wash green onions at home? And you fill the tubes up with water, and you're constantly rinsing it in and out to get rid of any dirt that may. It's the same concept as the leeks do. So basically, once it's good and clean, and just so you know, so you don't get discouraged and think, I failed at cleaning my leek. You're going to be taking this apart, and I would almost put money on it. Every time you clean and use one, you're going to end up finding dirt in there. So just know that ahead of time, that it's going to happen, all right? So basically, you're going to use the bottom half of the leek, okay? The top part here can be very coarse, not very good to eat, okay? You could probably blend it and use it in something, but I have no idea what that would be. Fair enough? All right, so you're going to want these to be nice and thin, uniform slices. And whenever you're cutting something like this, whenever you run your knife across it, one point of the knife always stays on the cutting board at all times. Okay, you're going to push and slide through, and you're going to cut all the way through. Okay. The reason that is because if you do like what some people do, they just get in here and they start chopping really fast, then you end up with them stuck together and not cut through all the way. So to save your hassle later on trying to get that all cut back through and all the way apart, happens a lot of time with kielbasa. Anybody ever cut kielbasa into like ½ inch and you get to going too fast and that outer skin just doesn't cut through, right? Anybody have that happen? Same concept, okay? So as you get to slicing through these, you want them to be nice and uniform. Usually what I do is when the outer layer gets finally cut through, I stop and I peel it off. Okay? And I usually peel off 1 to 2. And as you can see how that dirt just collects, right? It's unfortunate, but it's part of it. Well, and we're through. And that's the other thing. Leaks will tell you when you're done, okay? So we broke off that outer edge, and as I began to peel, all of them were broken. None of them were that nice whole shape that we want our leek to be, right? Basically, once you get to that point, the leek's done for, all right? Now, in a salad like this, you're going to want to start breaking these apart. The thing that I would tell you to do, get them in a bowl, and then just start massaging them through. You can wait until you've cut your apples and added everything else in there, and you go to mix it in, and that will help break those apart like you're going to want them to be. I don't necessarily think it's necessary in this recipe to do it ahead of time. Of course, whenever you cook with them in a soup or a stew, you do the exact same thing as you're stirring. They'll break apart into their individual rings during the cooking process. So, any questions about leeks? And I'm not talking about the ones under your sink.
Do you have any tips, Jared, for using the top part, the green, tough, stalky part?
No, I just said that.
Oh.
I had no idea for uses for the top of
I
leeks.
missed
When you make broth.
Yeah,
Yes.
If you're making any kind of broth, just
Yeah.
throw it in there.
Throw it in there. That's a great idea.
It's going to get thrown away eventually, but it's
Yeah.
flavored.
Yeah, that's a great idea, throwing it in the stock or a broth.
I would say probably chop it down a little bit.
Well, it was that little, they were little.
Little leeks.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a big leek, it was just little.
Yeah, but the end was maybe that long.
Oh, okay.
That's all I froze and threw it in there when I was.
There you go. So that's one use. You can use the top of the leeks, this portion. You can use it for your soups and stews. Chop it up, throw it in your stock to make broth. Just helps flavor it. Obviously, it's going to have, like she said, a little bit of an onion flavor to it, a little bit less mild, or a lot more mild, a little sweet.
Yeah, but leeks start to become in season in the autumn months. That's when the peak season is. So I thought this recipe would be kind of nice to feature an in-season vegetable. And like they were talking about earlier with the temperatures in Poland, oftentimes they're having a lot of cooler months. So this would be another kind of staple that we saw in a lot of recipes. Another kind of heartier vegetable. And then when I made this at home, I'm not sure what kind of apple you guys used, but I used a mixture of Granny Smith and Honeycrisp apples. It calls for more of a tart apple. And then for the, I already mentioned the Greek, yep, so I use the Greek yogurt. So what do you guys think? I see that some of you started tasting it. Good.
Was this the Greek yogurt?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was the Greek yogurt.
So yeah, I was going to say, yeah, you find it kind of tangy. Because, at home we thought it was a little tangy, and if you like that, you can stick with the Greek, but if it's a little tangy, because it does have the lemon juice in there. It's a little bit of lemon, a little bit of Dijon mustard, which can be kind of sharp flavors. So you might just use a plain yogurt.
What do you think the nutritional value is between leeks and regular onion?
She's asking about the nutritional value between leeks and regular onion. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I'm going to say that they're probably pretty similar as far as the calories. The nutritional profile is probably pretty similar. They're in the same family, the onions too. So yeah, I'd say they're probably pretty similar.
I know there's a lot of nutrition in onions.
Yes.
But this is milder, so, like I can't imagine putting an onion in a salad like this. I mean, it's too much.
Right, yes, yeah, so it is a milder taste. So for a cold salad like this, it can kind of be a nice addition, not be too overpowering. Like if you use like a red onion or a yellow onion, it might be a little strong in something like this, so it's a little bit of a lighter, milder flavor. So any other questions? This one? Okay. I guess we're going to roll right into the next one, which is the roasted eggplant and tomatoes with pierogi casserole. Mouthfuls.
Yes.
So how many of you have had pierogies before? God, I had a roommate in college that had Polish background, and she made them from scratch. And so that was how I first got to try them. They're really good. If you haven't had them before, it's just basically a dumpling. So it's like a pasta noodle. And then it's filled, traditionally they usually fill it with like potato, cheese. Sometimes there's meat in there. Spinach is another common one. If you're looking for it in the store, a lot of times it can be kind of hard to find. It's in the freezer section typically, usually with like the frozen pastas, like frozen tortellini. I was able to find it at Walmart, and I think that's where we all found it. Yep, it cooks really quick. It cooks in like 5 to 7 minutes in boiling water. You can also cook it in a skillet on the stovetop. And traditionally, I think they oftentimes serve it with a little bit of butter and onion sauteed. It's kind of like the sauce. But this recipe here is a little different as far as what we're throwing in with the pierogi. So we've got eggplant and tomato. And when I made it at home, it was more of like a stack. Like it was like a pierogi stack versus a casserole. I know it says casserole here, but it was kind of more like a little, you have the eggplant sliced, then you have a pierogi on top, then you have a slice of tomato, and then you layer it with the mozzarella cheese. If I had to do this recipe again at home, I honestly think what I would have done is actually just diced up the eggplant and tomato and sauteed it or even roasted them and kind of had it chopped up a little bit, because I found that it kind of slid around a little bit, and you ended up kind of eating everything a little separate anyway. So that's just kind of how it turned out for me. But yeah, eggplant. How many of you like eggplant? Great, yeah. So eggplant was something that was very popular in Asian cultures, and it was brought over, I believe, into the Middle East, and then European, then brought over into Europe. And it wasn't introduced into the United States until European settlers kind of introduced it. And actually, a lot of people were afraid to eat it. They thought it was a poisonous plant because of its kind of deep, it's got a really deep purple color there. It was very unusual, I think, a vegetable that they hadn't seen before. So for a long time, a lot of people shied away from eggplant. But I assure you it's not poisonous, unless you're allergic to it, maybe. It's a very water-filled vegetable, so it's primarily water and fiber. So it really soaks up really whatever you cook it with. So like olive oil, the sauces, if you've ever had eggplant parmesan, it's like a sponge. It just soaks up those sauces. And I found with this recipe, I used a little bit more olive oil than it said, because I felt like I put that drizzle to a couple tablespoons, and it soaked it up so fast. So I used a brush and got a little bit of a dish out with some olive oil in it, and took a brush, like you would marinate or put on meats, and just brushed on the oil so it was more evenly coated. But Jared's going to talk a little bit about cutting into that eggplant and kind of how to process it, and maybe even tips for how to purchase it and what to look for in the store if you're not familiar with that.
To just keep with the recipe that we were talking about a moment ago, as far as what we did exactly the same thing with the eggplant, the pierogi, the tomato, the cheese. I did do a little bit of dry basil on there as well. And again, if I would have been able to do it again, I probably would have done it a little different. I think it turned out really great, but it's definitely probably a little bit easier to eat if it would have been a topping on top of the pierogi and then the cheese to kind of keep it all together. The other thing is I jokingly refer to eggplants as a purple sponge, because anything you cook them with, they will just suck it right up, right? The olive oil, like she said, if I could go back and redo this, that's exactly what I would do. I was thinking of that after I had already thrown all of the eggplants into my bowl to toss them in the olive oil, pepper, and garlic. So we're on the same page with that for sure. Definitely brush it on. If it's you, brush both sides so you get a nice even browning. I feel like that's really important to make sure that the eggplant kind of heats up, right? So now cutting, really just going to discard this top part. As far as purchasing goes, eggplants are a lot like any other type of vegetable or fruit in the store. You're really going to look for bad spots on them. As you can see, this one's really nice. It's got a nice deep purple tinge to it. You'll see some areas where there's been damage. It'll kind of brown up a little bit. That's fine. What the really thing is you want to make sure that it's nice and firm. Okay? You don't want it to be really squishy. If it's really squishy, the inside is not going to be very good. It'll probably be really brown. Okay? As far as slicing, definitely make sure that you have a sharp knife. Okay? Because it's very spongy, it's very easy for you to put your knife on there to slide, and then you end up with a knife in your hand, and you don't want that. Okay? So make sure that your knife is good and sharp so you get a nice clean cut all the way through. Okay? And again, you're going to want to make sure that these slices are even. And honestly, as far as this recipe goes, it doesn't matter how thick you make them, whatever you want. If you want them to be a little bit crisper, whenever you go to set everything up, cut them a little bit thinner. If you want them to have a little bit more meat to them, then go ahead and leave them just a bit thicker. Okay?
Another thing I wanted to point out is that skin on the eggplant, it's that deep purple color as I was talking about. And that tells us that it's high in antioxidants. In particular, it's a big fancy word of anthocyanin. So it's been shown to help protect against certain cancers and heart disease. That skin, some people shy away from it, but once you cook it, it breaks down pretty easily, and I don't find it to be too tough. I don't know about you, Jared, but I find that it softens up pretty easily.
Yes.
And is very much edible. So if you can leave that skin on there, that's where lots of good antioxidants are, and also fiber. This is a very fiber-rich vegetable. In about 1 cup, there's 5 grams of fiber. So we want to try to get at least 25 grams a day. So that puts a nice little bit in it. And it's also a low-calorie, non-starchy vegetable. Botanically, it's actually a fruit. I think botanically, we consider it a fruit, but nutritionally, we consider it a vegetable. So about 35 calories.
Is that because of the location of the seeds?
I think the seeds, yes, for botanically, and I think it is a flowering fruit as well. Yep.
Perfect.
So,
As far as this type of recipe, while using pierogies in it, if you don't like the texture and the flavor of eggplant, you could use squash or zucchini just the same, and it'd be just as good. So. It really is kind of versatile. The ideas and concepts that you can use a pierogi in are basically endless. You can do them with different sauces. Like I said, I think this would be great with zucchini or squash, and then just kind of keep the same concept all the way through. I think it'd be wonderful.
what did you all think? Good? Kind of a different way to use eggplant. I've always had eggplant in either stir fries with Asian dishes like Thai food, and as eggplant parmesan. Those are like the two main ways that I've had it. So this is something a little outside the box and kind of unique and different. Sweet and sour, yep, stir fry, yep. So yeah, any other questions about this recipe?
Yes. When you buy your eggplant, is there, some of them, like big, lot bigger?
Yeah.
Is that not good?
No, they're fine that way. Yep. Yeah.
She was saying sometimes they can be quite big. I think as big as a football. I've seen some of them. They're really big. Yeah, there's like 7 different varieties of eggplant too. So like your Japanese eggplant is like longer and more of a lavender kind of color, lighter purple.
Yeah.
There's even some that have stripes on them, white stripes. So there's several different varieties that you might see maybe at your farmer's market or specialty stores, markets.
Yeah. The only thing I would say is if they get much bigger around than that one, it may be beneficial to to slice up, because they're almost shaped like a pear in a way. So slice up through that upper portion, and then go ahead and cut it in half, and slice the rest of it half lengths. So that way you're not dealing with this large round circular item on your cutting board. It becomes a little bit difficult to cut. So that'll make it a lot easier, a lot safer. That way you can keep the point of the blade on the cutting board. I'm sorry? Just a little bit of cayenne, she says, what it needs.
That's the fun of cooking at home. You can tweak things, add things. I'm always tasting as I go to decide what else I'm going to add more of or less of, or even an ingredient that's not on the recipe.
Exactly. As a rule of thumb, for cooking class, I learned from week 1 that if the recipe calls for cayenne, I either cut it in half or omit it. It's the only cooking class I've ever been yelled at in, so
very good.
we still way clear of hot foods. We try. And I'm just kidding. Nobody yelled at me.
All right. I think we're ready for our hunter stew.
So we kind of did it backwards because I think a lot of Polish customs, they start with a soup or maybe a stew. So we're kind of doing it backwards. We're going to end with the Polish hunter stew, and I think they just cleaned out the refrigerator and just put everything they could find in there. So there's several different ingredients, and I'm sure you could add different ones in, just like it was suggested to use some squash instead of our eggplant. So it uses lots of different things. You could use the rest of that cabbage you didn't use for your cabbage rolls. I found out last night you could include this in the stew. So this is a very common thing, I think, for the Polish customs to have, is to do a stew or a soup. And again, a lot of their customs came from survival, so they would just take what was actually left maybe at the end of the week and include it in and have a soup that maybe they started the meal with, or maybe that wasn't their entire meal. So we have lots of different things in this one, a lot of different vegetables as well as lots of different seasonings. So I'll let Jared just share with us a little bit about how he put this one together.
Perfect.
Different than maybe we did the recipe, or we did it like the recipe.
As far as this one goes, I'm a firm believer that a soup or a stew should set in a pot for a good length of time, right? I always feel like that's the best way to get all the flavors really brought together well, is just to let it set on low and cook it. So this actually cooked on low for quite some time in the kitchen. It was panned up about 4 o'clock or so. It was on there for quite some time. So that's just a preference from me. As far as ingredients go, I kept right to the recipe, except. You're exactly right. You're exactly right. How'd you know? More once, not again. No, the only other thing that we had issues with was the smoked paprika, sweet paprika. All we had was Hungarian paprika, which is, it's a little bit oranger than like a Spanish paprika is. Flavor-wise, they're the same, and I think they actually got some smoked paprika for, yeah. So
if you're like
I should have
Jared,
just asked them.
Yeah, we had some we could have tossed in there.
Exactly.
So if you're like myself or Jared, you didn't have smoked paprika, that's one of the door prizes.
There you
is
go.
to get some smoked paprika to take home.
Yeah. And you know, to be quite honest, on dishes like this with a soup or a stew, you can really get away with limiting some of those type of things. If it calls for paprika, or it calls for sweet paprika, and all you have is Spanish paprika, just use the Spanish paprika. It's not going to be that big of a difference in flavor to ruin the dish, right? So go ahead and use it. And as far as the vegetables go in it, I think it's very similar to just about any other soup or stew that we would have here. You've got your onions, garlic, carrots. About the only thing that wasn't on there was celery that we usually throw in a lot of our soups and stews. But you've got the cabbage in there, which is a great addition. I wish we used, sauerkraut as well. I was not a very popular person in the kitchen this afternoon, just so you know. All I heard was, what stinks back here? And I just had to raise my hand. That's me. So, sorry.
So this is a pretty low sodium recipe as well, a low calorie, recipe, and we really don't have many carbs in it. If we wanted to reduce the sodium even more, again, it's kind of like our first recipe, you can kind of do this as your entire meal. And so if you're looking at that, 500 milligrams of sodium is not bad if it's going to be your entire meal. But of course it uses some either low sodium or no salt chicken broth. You could again look for, this one didn't call for it, but you could again look for the no salt added diced tomatoes that you add to it. And then also look for some tomato paste that didn't have the sodium in it as well if you were concerned about reducing the sodium content a little bit more. So we also have, as part of the door prize, with the smoked paprika, the red wine vinegar, and so you may have that in your cupboards already. But if you don't, and you win the door prize, you'll have it for this recipe. Did you use red wine vinegar?
I'm sorry?
Did you use the red wine vinegar, or you could do the dry red wine?
We just did the dry red wine.
Okay.
So, yep. I didn't, and here's the reason why I went with the red wine instead of the red wine vinegar. With it already having the sauerkraut, you already have that vinegar, that sour note there. I didn't want to add to that. If you like that more, then whenever you make it, you can make it with red wine vinegar instead of with red wine. And this also gives you the opportunity to try it with the red wine in case you don't cook with wines at home.
So it says to cook it for 2.5 to 3 hours. I don't think it would hurt to cook it longer because what you'll be tasting obviously was cooked a longer time period than that. So.
Do you think that is a slow?
Absolutely. Yeah, she asked if it would be good to put it in a slow cooker of some sort. That would be perfect. Yes.
Someone else have another question?
That's what I was going to ask.
Okay.
Crock pot would be
So we're going
great.
to have to pull those crock pots out and start using them as the weather gets cooler. So this would be one maybe that you can include in that. Yes, sir?
Did you guys modify this to use turkey, sausage, and bacon? That doesn't sound very Polish.
It was actually a healthier,
So
yeah. The recipe that it came from was a healthier version of a Polish hunter stew. Yeah.
It came from the group that we dietitians all belong to, so they do modify it to make it a little bit healthier version. Yes, ma'am?
So I'm reading through the recipe and I see the meat ingredients, but down in the directions it mentions to add the bacon, sausage, and pork, and I'm not seeing any pork in the recipe. Was that like something?
I think it was probably a typo.
Change they made and they left pork on there, or?
I don't think the original recipe had pork in it.
I don't see any pork. It's
Yeah.
all turkey and chicken, so,
Yeah.
okay.
I would say that was probably a
When they
typo. Yeah,
when
whenever
made the
they were
recipe
putting it
healthier,
in.
they just left it
Yeah.
on there. Okay.
Yeah. Because they basically have it printed off and then they have somebody that types it up for them day of into this
Okay.
scheme. And I'd say they probably just accidentally typed up pork instead of sausage
Or maybe get
for the kielbasa. Yep. And the kielbasa that we used was actually a pork and turkey kielbasa. So.
And I have back there in the refrigerator that I was going to bring out and show the turkey one that I bought so we can kind of compare the ingredients or the labels on them to compare the different contents. So you can get several different varieties I found when I looked. And you get the turkey one and you can get the more traditional one. This one is made with pork and turkey, but you can get one that is just all turkey. And then you can also, I think, get a beef one.
Yes.
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 Okay. So what do you think about this recipe?
really good.
So you could modify it by putting different vegetables or more vegetables.
If I was gonna make that, I would chop up the cabbage so it's not stringy. I don't like the stringy
shredded?
part of the cabbage, sauerkraut. I would make it smaller pieces if it was me.
Yeah,
That's the way I would do it.
yeah.
So it hangs off your spoon and drips, you know.
Oh, yeah.
That's the way.
They just wanted you to work for it.
I didn't work, I stopped.
There you go.
Sorry.
So is this one that maybe you would try at home this fall, this winter?
And whenever I prepped the cabbage, I sliced it thin as a half, and it was about this big around, right? And then cut it in half again. So the strips on the cabbage was probably about 1.5 to 2 inches long. Now I do know that the sauerkraut that we purchase is usually some pretty long and stringy sauerkraut. So if I would have thought of it, I probably would have chopped that up prior to putting it in the pot.
I take scissors and I cut it up with scissors.
Yeah.
Is it sauerkraut cabbage?
Yeah.
So we got two kinds of cabbages.
She's got regular cabbage and rotten cabbage. No,
Are
it's
you
just
sauerkraut?
it's basically just pickled. Any other questions?
That must have some Polish comments.
Did you like them all?
I like them all.
She said she thinks she must have some Polish in her. She liked them all. I just think you have a palate and you enjoy good food.
So hopefully you can use these recipes at home. I think there's some that would be good for the season that we're coming into, the fall season. You'll be trying those, and I really think you could use part of that cabbage for the cabbage rolls and the other part for this recipe.
Absolutely.
Would be about right, so you can be conservative with those things. So our next cooking class is on October the 8th, and it is Pumpkin Tricks and Treats. So registration will open for that tomorrow morning at 7. You can also subscribe to the YouTube channel or share it. So if you know someone that didn't get to attend tonight and if they want to see what we did tonight, it's on the YouTube channel. The recipes are also on Pinterest, the Pinterest channel, CMH Bolivar, and then